Is Alex Nelson here somewhere? Oh, there you are. Will you give your attention to Alex, because he is going to make your life easier. I promise. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. Well, Schmidt was supposed to be here, but he's not. So just me. All I really have to say is the email really doesn't allow us to actually view and edit your work. So for you to benefit from the Writing Center, which, I mean, it's great if you email us. It'll let us know if you have any questions. But feel free to just send your stuff to us directly. Just send it to me, send it to Ben, send it to Kaylee, send it to Christine, send it to Brennan, send it to, really those guys over there. Send it to them. Do it. Just do it. So, they know their duties. They know what they're supposed to be doing. So, they're not going to be like, oh my God, why are you sending me papers and stuff? No. They know what they're supposed to do. They know why they received your papers. So, send it to them. Or if you need help in like a class or something, you need help with studying or another subject, just email, just talk to us directly, something like that. So feel free to utilize your resources. That's all I'm saying.
And I will follow up by saying that, so not only is he helpful because he's NHS and they're compelled to help you, they have to, but all of them took this class. They wrote this paper, right? So they know what they're doing as far as helping you. No, they're not sending you their copy. Okay. So a couple things. One, there's an attendance sheet going around. Two, you're going to a table based on which number you were given. You were all given a number value which dictated which pages that you read. It was a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. That dictated which pages of stamp that you read. Everyone's here. Will you raise your hand now if you were a 1? 1. Okay. You 6-ish, you'll meet that table right there. Okay. 2s, raise your hand. Let's meet right here. 2s, this table. 3s, you'll go to where Kyler's sitting. 4s, you'll sit here. 5s, you'll sit at that table. 6s, middle table.
I'm a 3, never mind.
8 is stamp.
The stamp article?
1,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I have no idea.
Or no, it's Jack. Or no, it's like one.
Who's one?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay, what number is that?
You should have 6-ish people.
Wait, what number is that? What number?
This would be 4.
Where's
Why
one?
did you grab my stuff?
Oh my God, I'm losing it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Why are the 6s only having 2 people?
I'm probably like,
I'm guessing something happens where those aren't all done.
Anybody need a new copy of the stamp article? I've got it. Yes, please. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to give you 5-ish minutes. Your job is to find document evidence that Stamp feels one way or the other about motivations for slaves to work hard. Remember, there were 3: culture, economic, instead of avoiding punishment. Did Stamp buy all 3 arguments? And then, is there historical evidence that you might use to prove Stamp's point of view? Mr. Schmidt, do you have something to say? I don't know. You keep pointing at me and mouthing something. Oh. Okay. Any questions? You know what you're doing? Just to guide you just a bit, I will tell you this. Stamp disagrees on 2 of them, but he buys one of them. He agrees one of them was a motivation. The other 2, he's like, Okay, go to work. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Because like the economic incentive is their sense of freedom.
Yeah.
That's so the first one is like his point of view that says that is literally our very first sentence that we have on our reading. Slaves showed great eagerness in some if they could get not all the advantages of freedom.
Yeah, they like to hire their own time. Blah, 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 because they were then under less restraint than everything.
Yep, and had great opportunities for themselves.
So that's document evidence.
Yep.
I mean, historical evidence.
I mean, like, do you have like a
Number 11 in the second paragraph, it's right by that little, it's after it says a slave on a Louisiana sugar plantation assured Olmsted that slaves did desire freedom. They talked about it and they speculated, blah, blah, blah. Is that
Yeah.
7 or no?
That could be.
Could be.
Well, I feel like they point it out, but
Question mark it.
it kind of is and isn't a historical example. Like it's a historical example in the sense of like, yeah, that's one specific account, but it's not really in the sense that it's just the little quotation is his only answer was a short-term contentious meeting.
They would be rebelling or running away. So Stamps like the law. He rejects that argument by saying slaves are afraid of being punished.
Wait, does
They're constantly
emancipated
running away and
mean?
threatening rebellions.
Free.
Yeah, being freed after slavery. Right?
Yeah.
We'll just do historical example question. Okay, so
A good quote or whatever's in there. He might not. Doors and cages might have
This is running away and then you're on.
If slaves did jail for the most of the time, they did so because they usually saw no other practical choice.
Does that support though?
I'm in the wrong boat.
So you're working in your out. This is my point.
I mean, does it disprove anything?
hey, yeah.
Okay, coming on.
Okay.
You said, are you group 2 though? You said it.
Okay.
So the one that you
What were you asking? Sorry.
Kind of yes.
If slaves yielded the authority most of the time, they did so because they usually saw no other practical choice. So does that disprove other things instead of just prove economic incentive?
It kind of shows that he kind of agrees with punishment, but he goes on to say, but punishment wasn't a key factor. Because like they prided themselves on not being as valuable by acting
Doesn't
out.
agree with punishment because he says later, even the most passive slaves flared up in protest.
Yeah. So most of the time they
What do we get, boys?
Only
did
talk-
what they supposed to.
You need another
But they
couple
were
minutes?
still trying
Yeah.
to rebellion.
The big hand is on the 10. That's when
Says-
we'll resume.
I feel like right here, and
Right here, many slaves were doubtless pulled by conflicting impulses, a desire for the personal satisfaction gained from doing a piece of work well, as a desire to risk or outwit the master by doing it badly or not at all.
Do you think that could be part of Black culture? Like they wanted to work hard, but they also kind of wanted to outwit.
Where are we
their
looking?
Yeah,
masters.
that would be part of culture.
Where are we looking?
Paragraph 7. So the second,
Not that
the
every-
second full paragraph on page
Masses of
261
slaves,
that says
freedom.
many slaves.
Okay, but then we need.
Many slaves were doubtless pulled by conflicting
Yep,
impulses.
that
It is-
sentence.
I highlighted that. What's it for?
Culture document evidence.
So historical example or a quote?
Alright.
Quote.
So his look is lacking.
So then historical evidence for that could be
So he was like prideful.
at the bottom, that quote, we all know can claim by the slaveholder that the slave's feeling of obligation to his master is of so flimsy.
Oh, wait. So this is like saying that they worked hard because it was like a satisfaction to them because they did it good. So if they did it bad, they wouldn't feel good about their work.
Well, slaves either felt
Yeah, because it's.
like they had conflicting like feelings, like they wanted to do it well, but they also wanted to resist their owners.
What about this one? So, on page 262, it says the Mississippian told Osmond that the smart ones were rascally and constantly getting into scrapes in the Louisiana and confessed that so and so was the greatest rascal. So that would be historical evidence.
Who's your spokesman? Who's going to be the one talking on behalf?
What sentence is that?
Unless it's multiple
A
people, that's great.
Mississippian told Olmsted on 262.
That's the example.
We didn't really find any punishment. Did it?
I found lots of punishment.
What? I don't know. Where? Can you? We have like a minute.
Punishment quote. Slave resistance, whether bold and persistent or mild and sporadic, created for slaveholders a serious problem of discipline.
What page? Where?
260.
260, first of
That could be a
first
quote.
sentence of the
In making them, in
fourth
making,
paragraph.
and then the next page over, 261, last sentence. In making themselves troublesome property, they provide reassuring evidence that slaves seldom wear their shackles lightly.
This is to avoid punishment.
Yeah, I don't know what it has to do with it, but I know that like this is talking about the shackles lightly, and then the problem of discipline,
They
like
didn't-
slaves
they didn't
resisting.
care.
The slaves are
They didn't
resisting.
care
Yeah,
about,
they
like, the punishment really is what's saying.
They
Yeah.
weren't afraid, so it's disagreeing with the
they resisted the slave owners.
So slave resistance, whether bold and persistent or mild and sporadic, created for all slaveholders a serious
That's a
problem.
punishment quote.
Okay.
Yeah, historical evidence would be they
A couple
probably
groups now
discussed
have
in
made a persuasive argument that
essays with
slaves
such
did
titles as
form a
Management of
community,
Negroes.
but
Yeah, there's lots of books
the
written.
problem
Yeah,
with
so the books
the groups that I just walked by was what bonded them together? Not working hard. No. Resistance,
Mm-hmm.
rebellion, but that's not a motive to work hard. Community not based on working hard, community based on rebellion and resistance. That's different than Genevieve arguing we worked hard because we're a family. Okay. How we doing? We're 1 minute past the due date.
Oh, in North Carolina.
We ready? Let's give it a shot. Okay. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go group to group. Well, first of all, let's agree. Let's agree on Stamp's point of view. Does Stamp buy the argument that a sense of community motivated slaves to work hard?
No.
No. He rejects that argument. No, it didn't. Does he agree that economic incentive was a motivation? Yes.
Do you guys find any
Yes.
economic
In
ones?
the form of
He
freedom.
does. How about the avoiding punishment argument? Nope. Nope. Was not a factor. Okay, so let's prove those three things. Group one, you want to address the culture? Well, you talk now. What are you
We're
going
not
to
group
prove?
one. We're group two.
You're group two. That's group
That's
one.
group one.
Group one. Prove any of the three. Prove all three. What do you got? Standing. Speaking loudly.
A lot of the economic incentive because slave owners believed that the slaves didn't know what freedom was solely because of the fact that that's what the slaves told them. But the slaves, on page 259,
259.
an ex-slave paragraph for the first full paragraph on that page.
First full paragraph.
From an ex-slave claims describes freedom in very accurate terms. I am now my own mistress. I need not work when I am sick. I can do my own thinking without having anyone to think for me, to tell me when to come, what to do, and to tell me when they get ready. Since the slaves had this great depiction of what freedom was, just the idea of it motivated them to continue in their work.
So I love what you said. What does that prove? Is that rejection of slave culture, or is that an economic incentive buy-in, or is that an avoidance of punishment? Where do you see that quote fitting?
Mostly under economic incentive. Yeah.
You think that's economic incentive? Okay, very good. I'm totally comfortable with you making that argument, that the concept of freedom was a motivation. Working for yourself is a motivation. That's economic incentive. I think that's great. Well, I don't know. Did you find historical evidence of that, or do you want to find another quote that makes another argument?
That's just the
That
quote.
is a
That's the document evidence, I believe. Or maybe that's the historical
that
evidence.
is a
That'd be
historical.
my historical.
Historical evidence. Okay.
So you need a
Yeah,
quote for that.
and then previously on 258, he goes into more detail about why why the slave masters believed that the slaves didn't actually know what freedom was, and why that's not true. Like at the end
You had what pages?
the first one, 257, 258.
Okay. So you had 259. Everyone look at the very next paragraph on 259, the second full paragraph. Second full paragraph. Second sentence.
Oh my gosh.
Some, perhaps the majority, had no more than a vague, unarticulated yearning for escape from burdens and restraints. They submitted, but submission did not necessarily mean enjoyment or even contentment. Submitted to what? Working hard. Did those slaves work hard in those fields because they thought it was a family and they're part of a team? No! No, it did not mean enjoyment or contentment. They must have submitted for another reason, right? That's a nice little quote. Rejecting the argument that this was about culture. Oh, baloney. They submitted. They said what the master wanted to hear. Oh, this is great. God, I love competing and working really hard. Shucking corn! Man, is this fun. Oh, it's fun, massa. Haven't we all done that? Haven't we had teachers who hand out an assignment and then ask you later, like, isn't this fun? And you all say, yeah. And what you mean by yeah is, no, I hate it. But you're nice and kind, and so you say what the teacher wants to hear. Or your mom or your dad, your mom makes an awful dinner and says, how do you like it? I love it, Mom. What you mean by that is, good God, this is awful. I wouldn't feed it to my dog. But you're nice and you're kind and you say what Mom wants to hear. Okay. Did that group have anything about either of the other two arguments? And no is just a dandy answer if that's true.
No.
Okay. So what we've learned from group number one is a rejection of culture. Slaves did not work hard because of any sense of community. That was not a motivating factor. Okay? Let's move on to group 2. Any particular arguments? Document evidence or historical evidence? What you got? Who's our spokesman? Liv.
I guess. Okay.
Liv, if you stand right here, you'll be on TV too.
No. Right.
She's just off camera.
Okay. On 260, like the very first paragraph,
260.
that would be document evidence for the economic incentive because they showed their eagerness to be free, and which isn't really economic incentive, but like
You're right on. Read
Yeah.
read the. I'd say read the paragraph.
okay. So slaves showed great eagerness to get some if they could not get all of the advantages of freedom. They liked to hire their own time or to work in tobacco factories or for the Tredegar Iron Company because they were then under less restraint than in the fields and they had greater opportunities to earn money for themselves. They seized the chance to make their condition approximate that of freedmen.
I don't know if there's a better quote in the entire article than that one. Did slaves work hard out of a sense of economic reward? Yep. They hired themselves out. After they were done working for their slave masters, they would then, with their free time, say, can I go work for some other entity? There was one ironworks factory in the South, that Tredegar one, and they get paid. They would get paid because it was their own time, and they worked hard. That's economic incentive. Very good. I saw a hand up before we continue. Never mind. Anything else? Do you have any evidence of that?
Would in the next paragraph, like after the little 11, where it talks about a slave on a Louisiana sugar plantation, we thought that might be historical.
Okay, who's this Olmsted guy?
He
Assured
is-
Olmsted. What's that?
He's a slave off of a Louisiana plantation.
He is.
Yeah, it says a slave on a Louisiana sugar plantation assured on.
I don't know who Olmsted is either, but that is historical evidence, right? So that part there is a piece of evidence suggesting that slaves worked hard on their own. Go ahead. I think that's right. I think this guy named Olmsted kind of traveled and asked questions of slaves, and this one slave went up to Olmsted and said, "Hey, this is true." Right? Made the argument. Okay. Anything else?
Not for that.
Not for now. Okay. Do you have another one for another piece of evidence?
Yeah.
Great. What do you got?
For punishment, we did on that same page 260 at the bottom, slave resistance. Wait, do you want me to move on to like the next?
No, that'd be great.
Okay. Slave resistance, whether bold and persistent, that sentence, and then kind of the next sentence right after that could be historical evidence for how they weren't really afraid to like not rebel, but
Resist working.
yeah.
Everyone get that? Page 260, last full paragraph.
The slave owners knew that they were a problem because they resisted so much.
Yeah, right? Slave resistance, whether bold and persistent or mild and sporadic, created for all slaveholders a serious problem of discipline. Slave resistance.
So they didn't work hard to avoid punishment. They worked hard because they wanted to resist.
No, they didn't
No.
work hard because they were
Just
resisting.
rejecting the idea of avoiding punishment.
Resistance is evidence that punishment did not work. Right? If you were under constant threat of being whooped, you wouldn't resist or run away or rebel. You'd be afraid of being whooped. But they did it all the time. Slaves resisted all the time, indicating to you that punishment didn't work. Right? If I tell you, right? You're my son, and I say to you when we're church, next time you go into that aisle, I'm going to whip you, and then you run into the aisle. So I bring you back and then spank you. You do that again, I'm going to spank you again. You run off again. I grab you and pull you back, and I spank you twice. You do that again or 3 times. At some point, Dad, you have to conclude this whole punishment thing isn't working. They keep resisting. That's what Stamp's saying. It's not working. Okay, and we will find plenty more quotes and historical evidence later on. Okay, very good. Anything else?
The historical example.
I think I already said
The books that
the books.
this underneath the
Such
management
as the
of
management of Negroes.
What?
right underneath
Right
it.
underneath the
As authors or
document.
readers, they saw the problem discussed in numerous essays with such titles as The Management of Negroes. Essays just filled the pages of Southern.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So these slave owners read books called The Management of Negroes for how to control your slaves, right? It's like parenting books, right? And how do you run Junior? How do you make him behave? So you read the parenting book.
The culture.
You give it a try, right? Anything else?
Well, I think I found one for culture too.
Great. So they found some for culture. Awesome. Where are we going?
261.
Right in the middle of the second full paragraph.
Yeah, the second full paragraph where it says many slaves were doubtless pulled by conflicting impulses. That sentence would be for culture, like a document evidence.
A quote.
Many slaves were doubtless pulled by conflicting impulses, a desire for the personal satisfaction gained from doing a piece of work well, as against the desire to resist or outwit their master by doing it badly or not at all. Right? Evidence that they did not work hard out of some sense of culture. It was a form of resistance. Somewhere in here, I can't remember where, but there's a quote that basically says that this whole concept of black laziness, that there's even a stereotype today. Blacks are really lazy. Well, think about you. You're a slave. You're doomed to a life of slavery. Would you work as hard as you possibly could? A lot of these slaves thought, and so they took little naps. And the suggestion Stamp's making is that was intentional. It was a form of resistance. Laziness was a form of resistance. Tell your mom and dad that next time you take a nap. I'm rebelling. And then go take that nap. I'm Rosa-ing. Nice.
Troublesome property.
Anything else?
The historical example for
Great.
that on 262, the first full paragraph.
Page 262 is a historical example supporting the idea that working hard as a cultural motivation isn't true. Did I say that right? Where?
A Mississippian told Olmsted that sentence, right?
So first full paragraph, a Mississippian told Olmsted, this writer, that the smart ones were rascally and constantly getting into scrapes.
And
Right.
the Louisian confessed that his slave Lucy was the greatest rascal and the smartest Negro of her age he had ever known. On the other hand, many masters were annoyed by the seeming stupidity of some of their slaves by their unwillingness to think for themselves.
It's one of my favorite paragraphs in this whole article. I mean, when you have time, read page 262. It's awesome. The slave owner buys this one slave, right? And he shows them how to use a hoe,
And he doesn't.
right? And he shows them. And the slave's like, oh, and, he's like, I don't know what to do this. And so the slave owner says, give me that. And he shows them. And the slave, like, pretty soon the slave owner basically hoes the whole garden, right? And said, God, you're an idiot. And the slaves walking back like, you did it. Yeah. Who's the dummy, right? Who's the idiot? The slave owner ended up doing what he wanted the slave to do. Right? Awesome. Okay, very good. Nice job, this group. Group 3, your show.
Yeah.
Proving any multiple arguments. What you got? Proving or disproving any of the arguments.
263, last paragraph. This one is proving culture and why they didn't work hard. The first sentence, Besides slowing down, many slaves bedeviled the master by doing careless work and damaging property. And historical example of that is right below it. A Louisiana doctor actually contributed a disease that only slaves could get, which means that they kind of all had a common
263.
Very good. Excellent quote, right? Oh, baloney, they worked hard because of culture. Slaves intentionally damaged property. You're unable to do that if it's just part of your DNA, right? They purposely slowed down. They purposely broke equipment. That is a rejection of culture. And then the historical examples right after. Very good.
263 is right below it, in the middle of the last. All right.
263, last paragraph. I'll just direct you back to 262 for a second. That last full paragraph. Awesome argument here. Reading it with me as I'm reading out loud. Slave owners generally took it as a matter of course that a laborer would shirk when he could and perform no more work than he had to. They knew that in most cases, the only way to keep him in the straight path of duty was to watch him with an eye that never slumbers. They frequently use terms such as slow and lazy and wants pushing, an eye servant and a trifling Negro when they make private appraisals of their slaves. Halves won't work unless I'm in sight, a small Virginia planter once wrote angrily in his diary. There's the historical evidence to support the argument that these slaves were lazy, but the slaves did it on purpose as a form of resistance. Right? It was not part of their culture. Keep going.
Okay. This one is about how punishment didn't work.
Didn't work.
Did not work.
Okay.
When he was driven to his
Where are you?
No.
First paragraph, 264.
264.
Tells the second when.
Yep.
Okay. When he was driven to his labor, he performed his tasks in a headlong, careless manner, getting down with the speed of cutting with his hoe the plants. He was supposed to, or the plants he was supposed to cultivate, breaking his tool and scaring everything. And there's a historical example by James H. Hammond on the next paragraph, where he noted in his diary, I find Hogan's chopping up cotton dreadfully and begin to think that my stand has every year been ruined in this way.
Awesome.
Where was that?
This slave wrecked this owner's stuff every year. And the owner was like, what is going on? So he fixed the thing and then he gave the slave like, all right, run it. And then he came back later and it was wrecked again. He's like, God, what's going on here? And finally the guy writes in his diary, I think the slave's wrecking it. Uh-huh. Yup. That's probably what happens.
Wait, which section is this called?
Well, that's a good question. So he's arguing that it was a piece of evidence arguing that fear of punishment wouldn't work, which is fine. You can put it there.
Well, like it said, when he was driven to his labor.
Driven to his labor. Okay, fine. Driven as in pushed. You're interpreting driven as in pushed to his labor.
Like, you're going to be punished.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Economic incentive. The last sentence of the second full paragraph of 264. One slaveholder felt aggrieved when he saw that the small patches which his Negroes cultivated for themselves were better cared for and more productive than his own fields.
Wonderful. Wonderful. See that? Great sentence. A slave owner is looking at his fields and it's crappy. It's awful. Then he looks at the slave's own fields and they're pretty as a picture. And he's like, wait a second. Awesome. That's evidence that the slaves worked hard when they saw that there was something in it for themselves. Beautiful sentence. Wonderful. Economic incentive worked. I would say that's a quote.
Well, I mean, it does say one slaveholder. So
You go either way. I'd be fine either way. Yep. Great. Nice job. Okay, group 4, what you got?
So So on page 267,
267.
it actually starts on 266, but the very last sentence. It says domestics and skilled artisans who supposedly had the most intimate ties with the master class ran away, as well as common field hands. I'm not really sure what our argument was. I think it was that it was avoid punishment, but it was because they didn't really care that they were close to the master. They kind of still ran away, even though they were more valuable than other common field hands. They weren't worried about punishment.
Yep, I think that's right on.
And then we got historical evidence in the next paragraph, right in the middle. It says an overseer on a Louisiana plantation wrote nervously about the many outrageous acts recently committed by slaves in his locality, and insisted that he scarcely had time to eat and sleep, which is kind of saying that he has to keep a close eye on them because they're, kind of rebelling too much, which implies that they didn't really care about the punishment.
Very good.
Yeah, I think that's all we had.
Oh, you have? Okay. Any questions there? Very good. How about 5? What you got? Who you got?
It's avocado.
What page? 269. First full paragraph. Okay.
For their own benefit, taking what they wanted. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so I actually have this marked down for a couple possible arguments. It depends on where you'd want to put it. Theft as a way of economically rewarding yourself, right? You steal money, that means you're interested in economic rewards. Or theft as evidence that they were not fearful of punishment. Either way, okay? I think that's great. Anything else?
We have a few more.
Okay.
We have like in the example for avoid punishment at the very bottom of 269. For the last paragraph. London, a slave on a Georgia rice plantation, ran to the river, drowned himself after being threatened with a whipping. So like, I guess that is kind of the best.
He didn't work hard anyway, he just jumped in a river.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. And then
Good or gross?
Better squawk.
It's one.
at times these active violence is being for no cause.
Okay, where are you right now?
271.
270. Okay, page 71. Now where are you? Third full paragraph. Starts at times.
At times these active violence is for no cause. And the result from slaves' bad disposition or particular grievance. Part of the culture which is to all orders.
I think the acts of violence were on the part of slave owners, though. That's what they're talking about. Acts of violence.
Just scratch it.
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. One thing I'll point out to you, page 268. How many of you are Harry Potter book fans? You follow the Harry Potter books pretty closely. So I'm going to pick on you, for example. Okay, so the Sword of Gryffindor. In human understanding, Who is the owner of the Sword of Gryffindor? How do they dictate who owns it? Okay, I'm playing this annoying game called Guess What I'm Thinking in My Head, which I hated when teachers did that. But do you remember, those of you who read the book, do you remember that in human concept, who owns the Sword of Gryffindor is who paid for it, right? That Gryffindor paid the goblins, and that means in his mind, he's the owner. He bought it. But do you remember how the goblins thought of it? Who owns the Sword of Gryffindor?
Who he gives it to?
Who made it? That you were borrowing it for a while, humans. But we're the owner because we made it. The reason I'm pointing that out is because on page 268, last full paragraph, there's a difference in culture as far as stealing. Slave owners thought they were stealing, but in African culture, they didn't see it that way, right? So I'll start reading. The slaves, however, had a somewhat different definition of dishonesty in their own code, to which they were reasonably faithful. For appropriating their master's goods, appropriating means taking, they might be punished and denounced by him, but they were not likely to be disgraced among their associates in the slave quarters, who made a distinction between stealing and taking. The difference in understanding what culturally stealing was. I didn't steal it, I just took it. But in the slave owner, that's stealing. But in the slave culture,
They didn't know.
that's not, right? It's a rejection of
Stealing is
culture.
like, I'm taking this pencil that Lindsay's right now.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah.
Good for now? Group 6, what'd you find? I believe that group 6 and 7 almost exclusively deal with punishment. Is that right? I know group 7 for sure. How about group 6? Is there someone speaking for group 6? Okay, go.
Okay, so I said to justify, 272.
272. Okay, pause, because now we're turning to that page. Here we are on 272.
There's that really big paragraph at the bottom. And on that paragraph, it says to justify the crime, amending the claims, and declare the crime of punishment, or that they now intend to use versus another. So, it's like when they started the rebellion, so they were like, I don't really care what happens to me. So I feel like that's like resisting or like what do you want to do? Or like not being a fear of punishment.
Very good. And I would actually, if I were the rest of you, I'd actually tweak what she did there. I would say that what she gave us was a historical example, Nat Turner's Rebellion. The good quote would be a couple paragraphs up. So the paragraph that starts, but an impasse. You with me?
Yes.
Yep.
Look at the last sentence. Violence, indeed, was the method of resistance adopted by the boldest and most discontented slaves. Its usual reward, however, was not liberty, but death. It usually resulted in death, but did the slaves stop? Nope. Okay, prove it. And then the next couple paragraphs talk about Nat Turner. Nat Turner's Rebellion. Remember I showed you that picture of Nat Turner? He chopped off that poor little kid's head. Remember that lovely picture? Okay. That's evidence to suggest that fear of punishment was not something that motivated slaves. How are we doing? Holy mackerel. Okay. Anything else?
You know, we just have like, we had an idea of like, that person wasn't gonna be. Like earlier in the paragraph, it said like specifically, the slave Jacob, for example, complained that if they came by, he would bring them and slave again.
Very good. So specific examples of people joining up with Nat Turner. Nat Turner was that slave that roamed the South and killed every white person he could find. And Nat Turner's Rebellion takes up several pages of this article, starting with 272 and kind of goes on, showing you fear of punishment was not a motivation for Nat Turner. Okay, very good. How about group 7? What you got?
Okay.
Nice and loud.
On page 275. last sentence on the very bottom, on these occasions, as on others, there was some substance to the rumors, however, much they were exaggerated. In 1856, slave unrest, and I goes on to the next page, increased noticeably in certain areas, including Texas, where there was at least one well-authenticated conspiracy, and that's documented evidence for avoiding punishment, because the numbers just kept rising, and so they knew what happened and they still didn't care.
Very good.
And then the first paragraph on 276, the first full paragraph, it starts in 1841, a group of slaves being carried from Virginia to New Orleans in the big Creole.
Brig means boat.
Where?
Brig means boat. I'm just
The second-
clarifying for people what the
The
word
first
brig
full
means.
paragraph in
The
1841.
boat's name was Creole. Keep going. You're doing great.
Oh, okay. Rose in rebellion, seized the ship and sailed into the Bermudas. In 1848, about 75 slaves from
Fayette County.
Fayette County, Kentucky, led by a white man, made a break for the Ohio River. And then those are two different historical evidence.
Very good. And actually, I would say almost the entire page 276 is one historical example after another. Stamp says, well, here, look at this. Here's an example of slaves making a break. And here's another example. The fear of punishment did not work. Okay. Okay. What I would like to know, and we can spend just a couple minutes here, is do all of you have at least one good quote arguing that culture was not a motivation, that economic incentive was a motivation, and that fear of punishment was not a motivation? And do you at least have a historical example for each of those arguments? If we're short anything, let's fix it. Silence is you telling me I'm good. I could write this bad boy. Really?
So we have a stamped mini paper, like the same thing we did for Genovese.
Look,
I do not consent.
same
I
thing
don't
as
like these gifts.
Genovese, a bulleted or actually written out 3-paragraph mini paper due Friday, along with the 2 Kias. It's worth a whopping 3 points. No. Why'd you say wait?
It's the same exact thing as Genovese.
All I did was take out the word Genovese and put the word stamp.
For 5 minutes.
And it's chapters 18 and 19 Kias, correct?
Yeah. Everyone got one?
I think so.
Bryn,
So I have just one more thing to say, and then I'll let you relax. If your quote or historical evidence is showing slaves as being lazy or intentionally destroying equipment, that is an argument rejecting culture.
Wait, reject.
If you find quotes or evidence about resistance, rebellion, running away, that is evidence of that punishment did not scare them. Laziness and sabotage is a rejection of culture. running away, rebellion, suicide. I'm surprised that group didn't address that. I mean, they'd rather die than go back. That's arguing that punishment did not work. Oakley dokley. Hooray!
I've never seen any. I've seen one.
Yeah.
And I was forced to watch it.